something that people have thought about a long time.
I think it's one of the plagues of Egypt, too, is red rain, blood rain.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. I don't know. But, so we have this opening scene where Leah, this young travel blogger, this young woman, is on this island, an Outer Banks island off the coast of South Carolina. And she's praying this horrible hurricane comes, and it devastates the island. Devastates. And kills people and ruins every structure on the island. And she staggers out the next morning, and she's dazed, totally dazed. And passed on, they're piling up the corpses. It's horrible, horrible. And she wanders to the beach, and it suddenly starts to rain. And she looks up, and the raindrops coming down are red. It's like a blood red rain, and she thinks, this is the blood of all the victims coming down on us this morning. And then, out of these curtains of red rain step these two beautiful blonde twin boys, 12-year-olds. And they just appear. And that's how the book starts.
And she is just captured by them from the moment she sees them, feels this incredible connection with them. They've lost their parents, their family, all their connections in this horrible hurricane. And she decides to take them home. One of the things I really enjoyed about the book, you've got the true horror, but I also think that you picked out kind of the horror we bring upon ourselves when we do kind of thoughtless or careless, even selfish things that bring some of the greatest horror into our life. And it's not just Leah, but her husband does a dumb thing. There's a police officer in there who's involved in a just hopeless romance.
They're all pretty dumb, aren't
They're pretty dumb.
I'm just realizing this. Wait a minute. What?
I mean, so you've got the real horror, but sometimes underneath it is the very familiar horror that we do to ourselves.
Well, the idea is that the reader is saying, what's wrong with them? They're so naive. Why don't they realize? Because the reader knows right from the beginning how evil these twins are. But none of the adults have any clue as to what's going on. And so the reader is supposed to say, come on, shape up. What's wrong? Get it. And,
wake up.
It's part of the frustration of the book.
Well, and I think it also is such a great way of building up the tension. And it's really you can't put the book down. You have to keep figuring out what's going on. I think, and maybe I'm reading something into it, and you're absolutely allowed to say, oh, that's crud, you're reading something into it. But Leah's husband is an author who's written a controversial book. And it feels to me like a lot of people haven't read the book, but they're still willing to condemn him. When I was a young bookseller in the 90s, a couple came up to me and called me a Nazi for selling the Goose Bumps in our bookstore.
Well, you were.
Well, I was, and it always just floored me how much people could become angry at me. I can't imagine what it was like for you, and maybe I'm reading something into it, but I saw the echoes of you getting back a little bit, saying, here's this really good guy, he's written this book for really good reasons, he's just a great family man, and the whole world thinks he's awful.
Well, he wrote this book saying you should be a friend to your child, you should not be a parent. It's about being a lenient parent. And I did it kind of as a joke because here's this guy who believes in being lenient to your kids, and then he has these twins in his house who are committing all these horrible things. So I thought that was funny. Also, my own self as a parent, my son, I sort of thought about that because, like, my wife Jane and I always say we're very strict parents. We're very strict, and we had one rule with my son that we always stuck to, and that was whatever he wants.
And you were strict about that.
Yes, we were. We never veered away. Whatever he wants. He was a happy kid. So I sort of thought about that as when I wrote Mark's character.
The craziness that has been directed to you, and hopefully is no longer directed to you because people felt you shouldn't write a certain kind of book. Were you able to brush that off?
There was less of it than you think.
They were calling me the Nazi and letting me
Yeah,
go.
they let me. I was fine. I was home. I didn't get out. No, I think maybe Goose Bumps was controversial in a lot of places when it came out. Nobody had ever done a horror series for 7 to 12-year-olds before. It hadn't been done. And the covers, of course, were much more sensational and much scarier than the actual books. The books are all kind of teases. They're not that terrifying, really. But I have to say, there were a lot of attempts to take it off school libraries and, a lot of that. But much less than you would think. And librarians and teachers and reading teachers were incredibly behind it because kids were reading. It was getting kids to read. And I think they were just grateful for that. So I was actually kind of surprised by how little controversy there was.
Good. It makes me renews my faith in the reading public.
Also, whenever there's trouble like that, Harry Potter ran into the same thing. Twilight books ran into exactly the same kind of thing. There are always people who are going to object and protest about these things. And it usually came from the same communities, which was kind of interesting.
Absolutely. When you were talking about how people are afraid of twins, I was actually thinking about a presentation that was here a year ago. We had an author who did a book on Columbine, and he said it was often interesting as he looked at the two involved in Columbine and then other killers that worked in tandem. There was always the one that was more the sociopath, and then there was the nicer guy who you could think of, you almost could reach, or seemed more human to us. But it was often this nicer guy that was the actual inflictor of the violence and the pain, which again is true in your book.
That's an accident.
That's an accident. I thought there was years and years of study that went into that.
No, it's an accident. Most everything's an accident. Yeah,
throw that question away.
No, that's too heavy for me.
That's too heavy.
I don't.
Is the idea?
Don't think about it that much. No, that's interesting though.
Yeah, that is.
By the way, the evil twins, Samuel and Daniel, they're named after my nephews. So I just told them recently. They were kind of surprised.
Are the names in the books or in all of your books? How do you come up with those names? Are they important?
Well, I need a lot of names.
I was going to say you need a lot of names.
I'm still doing 6 new Goose Bumps books a year.
Wow.
And there are like 110 Goose Bumps books altogether at this point. And they all start all over again. It's a whole new cast. In the early days, this is true, I used to get the names from my son's school directory. I used pretty much everyone in his school. I just went through and took their names and used it. And sometimes my son would come home and say, "Dad, you have to put Will in the next one." "Dad, you have to." I think he sold parts in Goose Bumps. I think they paid him like $10 to be the star of a Goose Bumps book. And of course, I always did it, right? But here's
because that was your rule, whatever you wanted.
Yes. Here's a sad story about my son. This is horrible. He never read one.
Do you think that's true?
Isn't that awful? He never, just to make Dad nuts. Just to get Dad. He never read one. And my son read only Garfield comics his whole childhood. That's all he would read.
Now, he's a filmmaker, right?
No, he's a music guy now. He's a sound designer. And
do you say I'm not going to listen to your music until you read
No, of course not. Of course not. Just Garfield. That was all he read his whole childhood. And then one night we looked in his room, and we were so happy he was reading Calvin and Hobbes. He had graduated. He graduated to Calvin and Hobbes. And here's the great part. He went off to college. He read only Garfield. He went off to college. He was an English major. Why? Go figure. And he did very well. I think you can do very well on Garfield.
And Calvin and Hobbes, as long as you're reading.
Well, yes.
Again, this might be too deep for what you were actually
For a
intending.
shallow person like me?
No. For a great story,
Yeah.
you're the great story.